Okay, today is May 17th, 2023 at the Sisters Historical Museum. We're here with Dennis Barclay. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes.
It's all yours. You can
Oh,
go.
mine, okay.
So just tell us about your family when you first arrived here and where they came from and
Okay.
just your early years.
My mom and dad first come to Sisters in the early 40s, like 43. And they originally lived up on Squawker, just before you go up to Peterson Ridge, up on the hill. There's Squawker, come down along there, and they lived in some canvas tents. I think there was 3 of them. That's where they first lived at before we come into town. And then after that, down here where the stitching post is at, was a little house in there, and then out front was like a gas station. And they bought that and the gas station, but the gas station was no longer a gas station, but that's where my dad actually started the first logging company out right there. Had 3 trucks parked right there. And then in we moved from there to the ranch down by the airport where that big white house is at in 1950. In fact, I was just telling Diane, that's where I spent the first 18 years of my life, was right there in that big white house. And had the airport there, but back in those days, the airport wasn't paved. It was all gravel airport back then. And my dad had his airplane in the first hangar. And the other one, can't remember who had, but there was 3 of the hangars there, but they were all occupied. I can't remember exactly who had them, but so they've been around here, and then the logging company started getting bigger and bigger. Of course, he had business partners, Phil Dahl and Sam Johnson, too. I don't know if any of that rings a bell to you or not, but they end up having 3 different mills, the one in Redmond, over there, I don't know what it's called now, but they're still, I go by there on 9th Street, because that's on the west side, and that's where the logs we used to deck the logs in there, we bring them in. And then they had a mill down on the Indian Reservation, which burned in 1958 maybe. But that was called Dull Pine down there. And then in Madras they had a plywood plant just up on the hill. It was called Jefferson Plywood at the time. So they had the 3 mills that they were working with. So, and then actually they all 3 ended up burning. Even the one in Redmond burned too back in those days, but then they rebuilt it too. So that's kind of how the logging business went, but he had like 3 different logging sites. We always had one on the reservation too, where even employed, he had to employ about 80% Indians down there. You couldn't just have all white guys on that job down there. So we had that going, and 2 to 3 sides were always run out of Sisters area here, just all around in the mountain area here. So, and he always employed up to about 100 people. Most of them all lived right here in town. So it was pretty much a logging town back in those days too. In fact, that's where I first got my start too. But I don't know, Ronnie was, I think I told Ronnie about graduating from high school and spinning the airplane in the ground out here. I told you that, didn't I, Ronnie?
I don't know. Go ahead and remind me.
And that was in 1965 after I graduated from high school, just out here on the Lazy Z Ranch. So when I got healed up enough, just before I got married, back then in 1968, I went to work for my dad in the logging woods. And that's where I got my start, was working with him. Starting from the ground, working, bumping knots, setting chokers, doing everything, you know. So I learned pretty much the whole thing, but that was part of what he wanted me and my brother to do, to learn all about the logging business so we could eventually take it over. So my brother worked there for many years too.
Which brother was that?
Steve.
Steve.
He died about 8 years ago. I think I told you a little bit about him.
Older than you?
Younger. He was a year younger. Then I got a sister that's 2 years younger, but her name was Susan. But she lives in Bend now. So that's kind of how that all come down. But I stayed with Dad up with doing that until we got into the Western store here. And that was actually I'll go back a little bit farther, but back in, when I had that airplane accident, because I was laid up and I was in a full body cast for about 6 months after being in the hospital for 6 weeks in full traction, and went into a body cast while I was on this ambulance cart, lived in the big white house down there by the airport, and the TV was right in the corner, so they set me up on this ambulance cart where I could watch TV right there. Well, I needed something to do because I've always been so active, so they come up with getting a little leather tooling kit for me so I could start doing leather tooling.
Huh.
And one of the guys that worked on the ranch, Bill Ayler, I don't know if Joe Ayler, you know Joe, his dad, built a little stand to go on this ambulance cart for me so I could lay on there and start capping leather. And that's how I got to start leather, doing that. So finally, it just started growing more and more. So then in 1972, I went to saddle making school in Eugene, DeWitt and Henderson Custom Saddlery on West 11th. So I learned how to make saddles back then. Made my first, in fact I still got it at the house out there. You know, the first one I ever did. So then come back into town. We lived in Redmond off of 27th and Wickiup, and I started a little Westerns business in the garage, making custom things, because I do everything, you know, purses, billfolds, you name it, saddles, whatever. And I was also working in the logging woods for my dad still, and then also we got involved with the Amway business of all things back then. You're probably familiar with Amway. Well, it just got to be too much. Working 3 jobs, starting going to work at 3 o'clock in the morning in the logging business, getting home in the afternoon, going in the garage, working for a few hours, get down there, have an Amway business at night. I'd maybe get 2 or 3 hours of rest a night, and back at it and going again. So I decided, well, I can't keep this pace up. That's just way too many hours. So I talked about coming out to Sisters, see if there's any small businesses for rent out here, which I did right across from the gallery. There was an old house up there that Cliff Allman used to own, and he used to have a restaurant right next to it called Cliff's Cafe right across from the gallery. And back in those days, Bill Reed, who had Reed Brothers Real Estate, was in one side, and I got rented the other side, which was Barclay Custom Saddlery, and that's where I got my start in the store, making custom saddles and the whole thing, you know. And mainly made a living just pounding leather back in those days. So a friend of mine, Fred Wells, and his wife had started a stitching post here near Gene Wells. So a few of us got together and decided, let's see if what we can do about promoting the town of Sisters, because, you know, Sisters was nothing back in those days, maybe had a population of 500 people. Very, very small. In fact, they were thinking about doing a bypass around Sisters and kind of eliminating Sisters back in those days. Well, we didn't want that. We want to get some business downtown here, so we formed a little junior chamber of commerce, called ourselves the Sisters SOBs, Sisters Organized Business People. So we started meeting once a week across the street in the gallery. And it wasn't long till we had probably 12, 14 merchants attending these meetings. We started to figure out things, what we wanted to do. And anyway, there was, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was with Brooks Resources. And he got wind of what we was doing, so he called me and wondered if he could come and attend one of our meetings. I said, well, sure, come on in. So he come in and sat down a couple different meetings. Then he come in one day and he proposed that Brooks Resources would get every merchant in town, give them $1,500 to false front their buildings to the Western motif. That was in 1973, and that's how Sisters actually got its start to the Western motif, was back in '73. So we started promoting the town, staying open later at night for businesses to be open, and so people from Redmond and Bend could come out here after work and go shopping. Because otherwise the town would be closed up by 4 o'clock in the afternoon back in those days. The streets were bare. But we started doing that. There was a musical group to come through town. I still think it was the Eagles that come through town. I'm just trying to remember, because the songs that were being played were Eagles songs. I remember that. Seen them go through town, so I got the telephone number off their little trailer they had. It was a pretty good sized trailer. Called them. Well, we set up I guess you would call it a concert at the old gym down here. And they actually come and set up, and we sold tickets for that, and we made buco bucks on that one. But nobody wanted to go in to get that one, so Fred and I, we footed the whole bill on getting them here. So then the townspeople thought they ought to have a share of that. You didn't put anything into it, well, so why do you think you're going to get anything back out? This is what Fred and I did. So it was things like that, and we started promoting for Christmas time. You know, just all kinds of promotions like that, and the town just started taking off big time. So then my dad seen what I was doing in the little Western store, and he thought, so he proposed building what's now Dixie's. And at first I denied it. I said, just leave me alone. I'm totally happy with what I'm doing here and making a good living at it and everything else, and just leave me alone. And he kept after it long enough, so finally he kept bringing an architect in with me and started showing me the plans of the building and all that, you know. And after this went on for probably 2 months, I said, okay, let's go ahead and do it. So that's how the plan got started on the new store down here. Of course, he owned the property at that time too, so not hard. At that time, that place was nothing on it. So it was easy to start building the building, so we built the building, and he helped me a little bit trying to fill up the big building with merchandise, but in the meantime all I was making was putting in the back room at the store or out the house that we had built out here in Crossroads, so we was getting enough merchandise to go in there. So then, all at once we moved into the big store down. I'm trying to remember, I think that was in 74 or 75. You know, that's been so many years ago, so I'm very neat to remember about when it was. So it took off. It really did. It got better and better, and I decided I would try something too, and that was to bring the English writing into town, which was unheard of. This is Western over here. And my dad, he kind of threw a fit about it. He said, oh no, he said, you need to keep your Western store where you cater to the old cowboys around here. And I said, Dad, old cowboys don't have money to buy this stuff. I need to spread my wings a little bit. So I went ahead and did what I did. And in fact, we owned some horses at the time, and I took up English writing too. So my wife at the time, her name was Kathy. She had a little Arab mare, so she did a lot of the Western writing, and I did the English writing. We used to go around Central Oregon here, go to the different shows and everything. That's how we promoted a lot of the stores, by going to these shows that they had. And we take out a van all set up. Inside the van was clothing, some clothing that they might need, or some tack or something. So we went prepared to have all that supplies there. So that's how it kind of took off. But when I had the store, the big store down here, my thing was to keep a lot of tack in there. Lots of saddles, lots of bridles and everything. It was about a 50-50 at the time. Nowadays, nobody hardly sells any tack. Just nobody does anymore. But my store was set up that when you first walk in the door, there was about 50 saddles sitting right there, the first thing you seen when you walked in there. So we kept it like that, and then John Levitt, his family finally bought it, and I think that was in 77, I'm going to say, but again, I might be wrong off a year or so, but don't quite remember. But that's how the Western store all got started back then, and I feel very privileged to be a part of that era of sisters, you know. Even when we was talking to Rubio here at the Western store before we come in here, you know, he's asked lots of questions about this whole thing too, so it's been kind of interesting to go back in there once in a while and see how it's done. But yeah, it's been a real privilege to have been part of this history out here. And thanks to Ronnie for inviting me to come here today to do this. I feel very honored, Ronnie, and I want you to know how blessed I feel.
Thank you for all the information you've given us.
And if there's any more information I can, something comes up,
So was the cubby hole part of that business too?
that was on the back side.
Okay.
Where
Kathy
the
Howell.
western store is, there's that little addition on the back side. That's where Kathy had the cubby hole at. But it's since been opened up where the western store goes. In fact, we were just in there.
Down that, is that where all the boots are? Is that the cubby hole?
Nope. No, if it's to the back of the western store on the right
Okay.
side out there, there's a little kind of
Pop out.
like a little, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, yeah.
And the door's still right there where she used to go into, but that was all closed up when she had it. You couldn't get into it from the western store, you had to get into it from the outside. So yeah, that was where she had hers, but she originally had her store up at the west end of town. I'm trying, about where that gas station, what's that gas station?
Yeah,
You know where I'm talking.
the-
That was about
the
where
Dino
her,
gas?
the big gas, yeah, there's gonna be the big gas.
Oh, the
Oh, the
Town-
one over here.
Town
Yeah.
pump?
Space Age.
Space Age, yeah.
Space.
yeah, okay, that's where, about where her first cubby hole was at before she moved in here.
Can you elaborate on the, your airplane accident? I mean, I mean, how did, full body cast, that's intense, that's a big deal. So how long had you been flying before that, and when did you start flying?
Okay, before that even took place, I was very involved with sports at school, basketball, football. We didn't have baseball back in those days. We had track though, but, and I'd go out for all of them. I loved football. Football was my favorite, but anyway, my senior year in the springtime, yes it was spring, well, because the accident was in June. My dad says, well, if you don't go out for, I think track at that time, if I remember, I think that's when track is usually in the spring, isn't it? He said, if you don't go out for track, I'll give you flying lessons. Well, yeah, you think I'm going to say no to that? So between him and his partners, Phil Dahl and Sam Johnson, they had 3 airplanes between them. But only my dad and Phil Dahl actually flew, but the Super Cub, the one that I wrecked, they bought it for the logging company. So Bud McLean, he was the superintendent of the Barclay logging, so he could fly from here down to Warm Springs to see how jobs were going. It was bought mainly for that. So I started taking lessons in that Super Cub, but the Super Cub was over in Redmond. So I'd have to go over there, but I started taking flying lessons, and I soloed like in 8 hours instead of like the 10 that they wanted to. But I think mainly because my dad was a pilot, and I used to go up with him all the time, and because I think he taught me so much, and I knew so much before I even started flying, that's why I soloed quicker than normal. So I've been going, trying to get hours, because you had to go fly 40 hours before you could get a license. Well, I was 17 years old, and back when I was 17, I used to be very, very gutsy. I've slowed down some, but very, very gutsy. Things that, I mean, I won't even get into it now, but there was nothing I wouldn't do. So my dad always wanted me to keep the airplane in Redmond, let me drive over there. No, I'm not going to do that, so I brought the airplane out here to Sisters and landed it there. And when he found out what I did, man, I mean, it was like I was totally wrong with what, and I was, but I'm 17, I can do this. You can't tell me what I can't do. So anyway, the night before the accident, he wanted to go up with me to see what I was learning. So, okay, we went up, so we started doing a few things, and the one thing when we got on the ground, he says, you need to take the airplane back to Redmond and get your instructors to show you how to do your stalls right. He says, you're not doing your stalls right. And I said, well, you can do it, you know how to do it. And he said, that's not my job, that's your instructor's job to do that. Okay, well, being 17, I thought, I can do this on my own. So the next night, it was just about 7 o'clock in the evening, and we were just having dinner. Well, I had so much energy in those days, I never knew what to sit down at the table and eat dinner was all about. I'd walk around, I'd grab something up and eat while I was walking. So next thing Mom knew, she seen dust drip in front of the window between the house and sister's up here. She said, well, I bet Denny's up flying, which I was. And next thing they knew, somebody come to the front door and said, hey, your son just went down in the airplane out to the Lazy Z Ranch.
Huh.
So yeah, I was up there trying to do a stall. Instead of feathering the throttle back like you're supposed to, but even if my dad would have said, just feather it back instead of jerking it back, that's all I had to know, but I didn't, nobody told me. So I jerk it back and the plane falls off and goes into a spin. And back in those days, they took spin recovery out of flying lessons. But all you had to do, after I was already in the hospital, went through that, turn loose of the controls, put your hands in the air, and the plane will come out on its own. Nobody said a thing. Dad didn't say anything, the instructors didn't say a thing. So all I was doing, trying to get it out, but I was putting it into a tighter spin the whole time. And I was up a little over 3,000 foot off the ground. And I wasn't the least bit concerned when I was coming down, because I'd spiraled it down before and flew, do all these different things. And then I seen the juniper tree coming up, and that's when I blacked out. Because I was probably maybe only 50, 60 feet off the ground. And when I blacked out, I seen my whole life. I think you've probably heard stories about that when, you know, your whole life comes to the present. You know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Well, that happened. And I kept saying, come on, let's just get this over with. This is not good. I don't want to know about my life up to now. It's all over with. I blacked out. Next thing I know, I come to, and the plane had already crashed. It knocked this juniper tree off the ground about this high. Just knocked it completely over. My feet were through the floorboards, and my whole face just hit the whole instrument panel up there and just did a number on me big time. But I tried to get out and I couldn't because my feet were through the floorboards. I took the seatbelt undone. But there was a guy working in the field out there, Black Butte, or Lazy Z Ranch that night. His name was Don Wilshire. Never forget him. And he come and got me out of the airplane. Well, what was such a blessing too, that's what he did when he was in the service, was recovered down pilots from their planes. So he knew what to do. So, cut to the chase a little bit, I ended up going to the hospital. And for the first 2 weeks, they didn't do anything with me. They didn't expect me to live. So, anyway, I'd been up in Alaska, because I went up to Alaska in the 80s. And there was a few things I wanted to know about this, so I'd come down and I was talking to my mom, and I said, tell me something, there's something I need to know. I said, well, I remember having the accident. I remember when you were out at the road, my dad asked me to say, hi Mom, I'm okay. I remember doing that because there's a whole bunch of people out on, I can't remember, what's the name of that, Jordan Road. They were waiting because a lot of people in town knew I went down. I mean, word passed around pretty fast. So I remember that. Next thing I remember is going into Bend and seeing the trees going by in the ambulance. Next thing I remember is going up the elevator in the hospital, and my brother, my dad, my two uncles were right there, and I look up and seen them. Next thing I know, I'm in the operating room and they're drilling a hole through my shin bone to put me in traction. And I kind of woke up, hey, what you doing? And so anyway, I was asking my mom, tell me something. How long a period of time was that? Because it's just like it all happened within maybe an hour. She said, the time you seen the trees go by until you remember going upstairs was 2 weeks. So I lost 2 weeks of my life right there.